Welcome to Tonight We Drift back, far back to the late 17th and 18th centuries, to a place synonymous with absolute power, blinding luxury, and the very pinnacle of European grandeur, the Palace of Versailles. Picture it now, a vast expanse of manicured gardens stretching towards the horizon, a palace of honey-colored stone, its windows glittering like 1,000 eyes in the afternoon sun. Gilded gates shimmer, fountains play. It is a vision of ordered perfection, a monument to the Sun King Louis XIV and his absolute reign. But palaces, like all great creations, are more than their facades. They breathe, they function, they exist not just in the grand staterooms and glittering halls of mirrors, but in the dim corridors, the cramped attics, the bustling kitchens, and the quiet corners where the machinery of majesty hums unseen. For every king in silk, there were 100 hands ensuring the silk remained spotless. For every queen at a ball, 1,000 small tasks were performed in near silence. Tonight we gently peel back the layers of gold leaf. We step away from the dazzling reflections in the hall of mirrors and explore the reality that pulsed beneath the splendor. We'll feel the chill of pre-dawn corridors, sense the weight of unspoken rules, and smell not just perfume and orange blossoms, but the lingering scent of tallow candles, damp stone, and the constant quiet effort required to maintain the dream. So settle in. Let the soft light of this distant world wash over you. Imagine yourself not as a king or a queen tonight, but perhaps as a shadow moving through the vastness. Feel the cool marble underfoot, hear the distant chime of a clock, and allow the intricate, often exhausting rhythm of Versailles to lull you into a state of calm, ready to drift through time. Our journey begins not with a monarch's awakening, but with those who made it possible, long before the first rays of sun touched the gilded rooftops, before the first pale hint of dawn bleeds into the sky over the formal gardens, before the birds in the menagerie stir. Movement begins deep within the palace, in narrow corridors that smell perpetually of dust and damp stone, in tiny windowless rooms scarcely larger than a wardrobe, servants awaken. Imagine yourself here, in this perpetual twilight of service. You are a valet de chambre, a body servant to a prominent duke. Your world is defined by proximity to power, yet you remain perpetually in its shadow. Your master sleeps perhaps fitfully in a chamber draped in velvet. You, however, slept on a thin pallet in his cabinet, the small adjoining room where his clothes and personal effects are stored. Or perhaps, if space was truly scarce, in the garderobe itself, that small cold closet where his garments hang, sharing the space with his shoes, his wigs, and the discreetly placed chamber pot. Your day starts not with your own needs, but with the intricate choreography of his. Silence is your first duty. You rise in near darkness, careful not to stumble over the chamber pot tucked into a corner. The air is chill, even in summer, the stone walls holding on to the night's coolness. You pull on your own simple, serviceable clothes, perhaps wool stockings darned many times, sturdy breeches, a linen shirt, a plain coat. No velvet for you. Sumptuary laws reserved such luxuries for the titled. Your clothing is a uniform of practicality. Your first task, fire. The embers in your master's fireplace will have died down to ashes overnight. You move silently into his bedchamber. He is a mound beneath heavy satin quilts. You kneel, coaxing life back into the grate with small pieces of wood and a careful breath, mindful not to cough. The goal is not roaring heat yet, but a gentle, welcoming warmth for when he stirs. Next, light. You take a taper, lighting it from your own small lamp, and move methodically around the room, igniting the candles in their sconces or the oil in the lamps. The light pushes back the shadows, revealing the opulence of the room, the rich tapestries, the polished furniture, the glint of gold trim. This is his world. You are merely its caretaker. Now the most crucial preparation, his clothes. You move back to the cabinet. Here, his garments hang like dormant selves. Today requires court attire, a serious matter. You select the fine linen shirt, the silk waistcoat, the coat of deep blue wool, the breeches. But silk and wool are cold against sleeping skin, so you perform a small, intimate act of service. You warm them, holding his stockings near the small stove in the cabinet, turning them gently like toasting bread. You lay his shirt against your own body for a few moments, letting your warmth seep into the fabric. Every garment must be presented not just clean and pressed, but agreeable. Time is measured not by clocks you see, but by the strict schedule of the king himself, radiating outwards to every noble in the palace. You know by the sounds echoing faintly down the corridors, the scrape of a door, the murmur of voices from the Aile de Boeuf antechamber near the king's rooms, when the grand laver, the king's ceremonial rising, is beginning. This signals your own master's rising time approaches. You assemble everything, the warmed clothes, the freshly powdered wig on its stand, the shoes polished to a mirror shine, the cravat starched and ready, a basin of warm water, a towel, perhaps a light morning wine on a small silver tray. You stand ready, just outside his door, waiting. This is where the true test begins, Versailles etiquette. It was a language as complex as Latin, and just as unforgiving to those who didn't speak it fluently. As a valet, your role was largely silent, but your movements had to scream deference. How you entered the room mattered. No knock, a vulgar, jarring sound forbidden within the palace walls. Instead, you used the nail of your left pinky finger, grown long for this purpose, to scratch almost imperceptibly at the door. A whisper of sound. Only if you heard a grunt or the soft call of entree would you open the door. How you moved mattered, back straight but not stiff. Head slightly bowed, eyes cast down unless directly addressing him. Movement smooth, efficient, never hurried. A dropped item, a stumble, a clatter. These were marks of disgrace, potentially costing you your position. Who was in the room mattered immensely. If a higher-ranking servant, say the master's premier valet, entered while you were assisting, you yielded your position immediately, stepping back without a word. The handing of each garment followed a strict hierarchy of privilege. Passing the shirt might be your duty, but presenting the coat, that honor might belong to a more senior valet. And the proximity, always the proximity. You needed to be close enough to anticipate a need, a stray thread, a misaligned button, a speck of powder on a collar, yet never so close as to intrude upon his presence. You were an extension of his will, invisible until required. Your day was a relentless cycle of these small, precise acts, dressing, shaving him, a task requiring immense skill and a very steady hand, maintaining his wardrobe, brushing coats with meticulous care, removing stains with dangerous solvents, storing garments with crushed herbs to deter moths, running errands across the sprawling palace complex, and finally the reverse of the lever. The kosher, the undressing and preparing for bed. The physical toll was constant, legs aching from standing silently for hours, back stiff from bending over tasks, eyes strained from poor light. The mental toll was perhaps greater, the constant low hum of anxiety. A misplaced item, a spot missed on a coat, an accidental meeting of the eyes at the wrong moment, a misunderstood whisper from a superior. Any misstep could be your last. Disgrace meant dismissal, and dismissal at Versailles, for a servant dependent on their master's grace and lodging, could mean destitution. And the rewards? A modest wage, often supplemented by perquisites, cast-off clothes, leftover food, perhaps small tips from guests. But the cost of merely existing within Versailles was high. Even servants needed presentable clothes. You might share a tiny airless room in the attics or the town with several others, your few belongings in a chest beneath a cot that was rarely yours alone. Imagine the smell in these cramped quarters. Wool, sweat, tallow smoke, the faint metallic tang of the chamber pot in the corner. The sounds, coughing, snoring, the rustle of straw mattresses, whispered conversations about the day's trials or the palace gossip, the weariness, bone deep. Yet there was a perverse privilege in this hardship. To serve a great lord at court was a mark of status among servants. It offered relative security, proximity to the center of the world, and the faint, ever-present hope of catching the eye of someone even more powerful or securing a slightly better position. The rhythm, however exhausting, was known. The rules, however Byzantine, were defined. So as the palace stirs, as the Sun King is bathed, dressed, and fed by his own army of servants in a ceremony of staggering complexity, witnessed by the highest nobles in the land, remember the quiet army moving in the half-light below. The valets warming stockings, the footmen polishing silver, the scullions scrubbing pots in cavernous kitchens far from the royal apartments. Their unseen labor was the true foundation upon which the dream of Versailles was built. Every gleam of gold, every rustle of silk, every effortless gesture of nobility rested upon 1,000 small, silent acts performed before dawn. The palace is fully awake now, the machinery of state and spectacle beginning its daily hum. As the courtiers move towards their appointed places in the grand ballet of the day, our gaze shifts, gently, towards a figure who stood at the very apex of this glittering world, yet found herself increasingly adrift within it. A queen whose own story became tragically entwined with the fading light of Versailles, Marie Antoinette. While the unseen clockwork of service ticked on in corridors and antechambers, the grand stage of Versailles itself was beginning to fracture, and at the center of the growing stillness, moving with a fragile dignity that seemed almost spectral against the fading gilt, was the Queen, Marie Antoinette. Picture her now, not in the exuberant bloom of her youth, hosting lavish balls in the Salon of Hercules, but later, much later, early 1789. The air in the palace, once thick with perfume and ambition, now carries a different scent, a metallic tang of unease, like distant thunder before a storm. The financial burdens of the crown are crushing. Whispers, once confined to pamphlets smuggled from Paris, now echo faintly even within the Galerie de Glace. Whispers of deficit, of bread shortages, of a nation straining under the weight of its own grandeur. Marie Antoinette feels this shift deeply. It manifests not in loud pronouncements but in a quiet retreat. Her world contracts. She spends more and more time away from the stifling formality of the main palace, seeking solace in her private realm, the Petit Trianon. Imagine walking those paths with her now, the air perhaps fresher here, away from the press of courtiers. The carefully constructed rustic charm of the Hameau de la Reine, the Queen's hamlet, stands complete. See the thatched cottages, the dairy with its cool marble slabs, the placid pond. Here she played at simplicity. Dressed in muslin gowns reminiscent of a shepherdess, she would oversee the tending of her prized Swiss cows, or perhaps participate in the theatricals staged in the tiny theater. Critics saw frivolity, a dangerous detachment. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was something else. A profound weariness with the relentless performance of royalty, a longing for an authenticity Versailles could never provide, an attempt to weave a small, controllable world when the larger one was fraying beyond repair. The scent here was of turned earth, fresh milk, and hay, a deliberate contrast to the wax and powder of the palace. But the idyll was fragile, already pierced by reality. The milk-maid role-play couldn't silence the cries from Paris. The cost of the Hameau itself became another weapon in the hands of her enemies. Her attempts at privacy only fueled suspicion. The Austrian woman, the Madame Deficit. The whispers followed her even down the shaded lanes of her retreat. The isolation she sought was becoming less a choice, more an imposition, a buffer dissolving against a rising tide of anger. Then came October, 1789. The sound isn't the delicate chime of a Versailles clock. It's the distant, terrifying rumble of an approaching crowd. Thousands, tens of thousands, marching from Paris. Not courtiers seeking favor, but hungry, desperate people, armed with pikes and scythes. They come for bread, and for the royal family. The gates, symbols of exclusion, offer no protection now. The invasion is not of soldiers, but of sheer, overwhelming human need and fury. The royal family is brought from Versailles, not in gilded carriages, but in the people's own lumbering wagons. Imagine the journey back to Paris, jolting over rutted roads. Look out the window, see the faces pressed against the glass, not bowed in deference, but staring, hard. Hear the chants, feel the palpable hatred, a physical force pressing in. Versailles, that monument to absolute power, recedes behind them. Not just a physical distance, but an epoch ending. The scent now is of dust, sweat, and fear. Their new residence is the Tuileries Palace in Paris. It is grand, yes, but it feels less like a palace and more like a gilded cage under constant hostile surveillance. Guards are no longer ceremonial protectors. They are jailers, often openly contemptuous. The rituals of court continue, but they are hollow, performed under the watchful, suspicious eyes of the National Guardsmen. Every move is scrutinized. Every whisper potentially reported. The vast echoing rooms feel suffocating. Marie Antoinette adapts as she must. Her world shrinks further. Her focus turns intensely to her children, Marie-Thérèse and the frail Dauphin, Louis-Charles. She teaches them, reads to them, tries to shield them from the palpable dread. She maintains a semblance of routine, dressing carefully, though her wardrobe is drastically reduced, attending mass, taking walks in the neglected Tuileries gardens, always under guard. She engages in quiet, desperate diplomacy, sending secret letters, hoping for rescue from abroad. A dangerous game. The atmosphere is thick with tension, a constant low hum of anxiety beneath the enforced calm. The failed escape attempt in June 1791, the flight to Varennes, shatters any remaining ill. The failed escape attempt in June 1791, the flight to Varennes, shatters any remaining illusion of normalcy or security. Captured, humiliated, brought back to Paris under even heavier guard, the royal family is now truly prisoners. Trust evaporates. Hope dims. The walls, both physical and metaphorical, close in. Then, the final descent. After the storming of the Tuileries in August 1792, the family is imprisoned in the Temple Tower. Imagine this place. A stark, medieval fortress rising cold and grim within the city. Gone are the high ceilings and tall windows. Here, the rooms are small, dark, damp. The air is stale, thick with the smell of mildew and confinement. The sounds are harsh. The clang of iron doors, the heavy tread of guards on stone stairs, the grating of bolts. Separated from her husband after his execution in January 1793, Marie Antoinette is moved to a smaller, even more oppressive cell within the temple complex. The conciergerie prison, her final stop before trial, is worse still. A damp, subterranean place, infamous for its rats and despair. Her health deteriorates rapidly in the cold, damp air. She suffers from persistent bleeding, likely uterine cancer, exacerbated by stress and poor conditions. Yet she maintains a chilling composure. Her trial in October 1793 is a grim parody of justice. The accusations are lurid, fantastical, fueled by years of vicious propaganda. Through it all, she displays remarkable dignity. Pale, thin, dressed in a simple black dress, her famous hair now stark white, cut short after her capture, she answers the absurd charges with quiet clarity and devastating brevity. When accused of unspeakable crimes against her own son, her response cuts through the noise. If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to answer such a charge laid against a mother. The silence that follows is profound, a moment of raw humanity in the procedural horror. The verdict is inevitable. Death. Her final morning, October 16th, 1793. She dresses carefully in a plain white chemise. She is given a cap, but requests time to arrange her hair neatly under it. She writes a last moving letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, intercepted and never delivered. Then, hands bound behind her back, she is placed in a common cart for the journey through the jeering crowds to the Place de la Révolution. The journey is long, the noise deafening, the hatred palpable. Yet witnesses note her composure. She stares straight ahead, perhaps seeing not the furious faces but the gardens of Trianon, or the face of her son. The end is swift, the blade falls, the crowd roars. The life of a queen born into unimaginable splendor ends in brutal public anonymity. The scent that lingers is not perfume, nor hay, nor fear, but cold iron and damp stone. Her story, so intimately tied to Versailles' zenith and fall, leaves a quiet echo in its vast, emptying halls. As the dust settles, both literally and figuratively, on the Queen's tragic end, our focus drifts, not towards the grand facades where history is often remembered, but towards the spaces between. The hidden arteries that kept the great body of the palace alive, even as its heart faltered. As the echoes of the Queen's final days faded, Versailles itself entered a long twilight. The grand salons fell silent, the mirrors reflecting only dust motes dancing in shafts of pale light. Yet, beneath the surface stillness, within the very bones of the palace, another story lingered. A story told not in gold leaf or silk, but in shadow, stone, and whispered secrets. Picture Versailles not as a single seamless monument, but as a living organism. Beneath the painted ceilings and polished parquet floors lay a hidden circulatory system, a labyrinth of narrow corridors, concealed staircases, and discreet service doors. These were the arteries that carried the lifeblood of the palace, its servants. Imagine yourself standing before a seemingly seamless panel of boiserie, intricately carved wood, glowing softly in the candlelight. But look closer, perhaps near the baseboard where the shadow deepens. A slight irregularity, a barely perceptible seam. Press gently here, and the panel swings inward, silent on well-oiled hinges, revealing a passage just wide enough for a single person to pass. The air that greets you is cooler, damper, thick with the scent of ancient stone, beeswax, and the faint metallic tang of centuries-old dust. These passages were born of necessity. The public face of Versailles demanded perfection, order, absolute control. Servants, carrying chamber pots, trays of soiled linen, buckets of coal, or steaming dishes from kitchens impossibly distant from the dining halls could not be seen crossing the state apartments. Their labor, essential as breath, was meant to be invisible. So, architects like Mansart wove this second palace within the palace, a world of perpetual twilight, lit only by flickering rushlights or small lanterns. Step inside. Feel the rough texture of the stone walls, cool beneath your fingertips. The ceiling is low, forcing a slight stoop. The floor is uneven flagstone worn smooth in the center by generations of silent footsteps. Listen. The sounds here are muffled, distant. You might hear the faint scrape of a broom from an adjacent passage, the clink of crockery from a service lift hidden behind a tapestry, or the low murmur of voices from the other side of a thin partition, a conversation in the king's cabinet, startlingly clear. This proximity bred its own kind of power and peril. Servants became unseen witnesses, carriers of secrets. A valet polishing silver in a hidden alcove might overhear a state secret whispered between ministers. A laundress folding linens in a concealed anteroom could catch fragments of a lover's quarrel. Information was currency, sometimes traded discreetly, sometimes used for leverage, sometimes carried silently to the grave. The air hummed not just with physical labor, but with the quiet thrum of espionage. These corridors also held less tangible passengers, echoes of the past. Versailles, saturated with history, intense emotion, and sudden death, inevitably birthed ghost stories. Whispers clung to certain passages. The Galerie des Glaces, gleaming by day, was said to hold a different presence at night. Footsteps pacing its length, the faint sigh of a woman, perhaps Marie Antoinette herself, revisiting the scene of her greatest triumphs and deepest humiliations, the chilling sensation of unseen eyes watching from 1,000 mirrored fragments. or the story of the petite écurie, the small stables. Some claim to hear, deep in the night, the restless stamp of phantom hooves and the mournful whinny of a horse, perhaps belonging to a young nobleman killed in a duel over a slight uttered years before, the sound seeping up through hidden ducts. Even the grand marble courtyard held its whispers. On foggy mornings, a spectral figure in court dress was sometimes said to glide silently across the stones, vanishing near a particular service entrance, a noble returning to a duty left unfinished. These tales weren't born of malice, but perhaps of the sheer weight of human experience pressed into the palace walls. The stones seemed to absorb the anxieties, the ambitions, the fleeting joys, and profound sorrows of those who lived within them. The hidden passages, conduits for the unseen, naturally became repositories for these lingering echoes. Centuries later, archaeologists and historians gently probe these secrets. Tapping on walls reveals hollow spaces. Careful examination uncovers disguised hinges, long-forgotten locks. Infrared scans map the hidden arteries beneath the ornate skin. Restorers, peeling back layers of paint and plaster, sometimes find traces: a servant's hastily scribbled note tucked into a crevice, a child's drawing on a timber beam in an attic, the worn groove of a rope pulley used to hoist meals. These discoveries aren't grand treasures. They are intimate, fleeting connections. A fingerprint preserved in the mortar, a name scratched into stone. They speak of the thousands of unnamed individuals whose labor, their very presence in these hidden veins, made the spectacle above possible. Their world was one of functional simplicity: rough plaster, unadorned stone, practical iron fixtures, a stark, necessary counterpoint to the overwhelming opulence it served. So, as you imagine these corridors, feel the cool, still air. Hear the muffled sounds of a palace both present and past. Sense the weight of silent footsteps that once moved through these shadows, carrying the burdens and secrets of a glittering, demanding world. The hidden Versailles, a testament not to power displayed but to power facilitated. A world of quiet endurance etched in stone and memory. From the silent world of servants and secrets, we are drawn, almost inevitably, towards the very heart of Versailles' public spectacle. A spectacle where light, sound, and scent combined in a deliberate, overwhelming display of absolute power. The daily ritual of the Sun King's table. Emerging from the quiet shadows of the service corridors, we step into a blaze of candlelight and ceremony, the Hall of Mirrors, or perhaps the grand apartment, transformed not for a ball, but for a daily ritual as meticulously choreographed as any ballet. The Grand Couvert, the King's public dinner. Here, amidst the soaring ceilings, the endless reflections, and the gilded splendor, Louis XIV transformed the simple act of eating into a potent spectacle of absolute power. Imagine the scene, as dusk settles over the formal gardens. Hundreds of candles are lit, their flames reflected 1,000 times in the tall mirrors, creating an illusion of infinite space bathed in warm, flickering gold. The long tables groan not just with food, but with the weight of symbolism. Silver gilt platters, heavy as sin. Porcelain so fine it seems spun from light. Crystal goblets catching the candle flames like captured stars. The air is thick, layered. The rich aroma of roasted meats and savory sauces, the sweetness of glazed fruits and delicate pastries, the sharp tang of citrus from the orangerie, the underlying, ever-present scent of beeswax and hot tallow, and the faint, expensive perfume worn by the privileged spectators. For this was not merely a meal, it was theater, and admission, granted only to those of sufficient rank, was a coveted mark of favor. Picture the crowd, pressed respectfully behind velvet ropes along the edges of the vast room. Courtiers in their finest silks and velvets, powdered wigs towering, jewels glittering like dewdrops. Their eyes are fixed not on each other, but on the central figure, Louis XIV, the Sun King. He sits alone at a small square table set upon a slightly raised dais, to dine with. The king was an extraordinary honor, granted only to the rarest of guests. Usually he dined alone, a solitary son around whom the entire court orbited. Now observe the silent machinery at work. This lavish display rests upon an unseen army, mobilized hours before. Far below, in the cavernous, sweltering palace kitchens, a world away in heat, noise, and smell, regiments of chefs, spit-turners, sauciers, and scullions toiled. Imagine the heat radiating from vast hearths, the clang of copper pots, the shouts of the chef de cuisine, the frantic energy as dozens of dishes were plated with impossible precision. Timing was everything. A dish delayed by minutes could mean disgrace. The journey from kitchen to king was an epic in itself. Covered platters, kept miraculously warm by hot water compartments or layers of cloth, were carried along those hidden corridors we just left, then up service stairs. At the threshold of the state apartments, the baton passed. The king's personal serving staff, the officiers de bouche, officers of the mouth, the gentilshommes servants, took charge. Dressed in livery of breathtaking richness, they moved with the solemn grace of high priests performing a sacred rite. Watch them now, processing into the hall. Their footsteps, muffled by the thick carpets, are barely audible. Their faces are impassive masks of concentration. Every movement is prescribed, every gesture laden with meaning. The presentation of each dish to the king follows an exact sequence. A senior officer would first present the platter to the premier maître d'hôtel, who would then offer it to the king. Louis might indicate a preference with the slightest nod. Only then would a portion be served onto his golden plate. The etiquette extended far beyond the king's table. For those few nobles granted the privilege of tables nearby, their position, the angle of their chair, their distance from the monarch, was a meticulously calculated indicator of their standing at court. A sideways glance from the king could launch a career. A perceived slight could end one. The clink of a fork, the sip of wine, the wiping of lips with a fine linen napkin. Every action was performed under the weight of observation, a silent performance within the larger spectacle. Consider the sheer scale, the waste that was part of the display. Dozens, sometimes over 100 distinct dishes might be presented during a single grand couvert. Roasted peacocks refeathered in their iridescent plumage, elaborate sculptures of spun sugar depicting mythological scenes, mountains of exotic fruits. Yet Louis XIV himself ate relatively simply and quickly. The vast majority of this staggering abundance was symbolic, a display of the kingdom's wealth, or debt, and the king's boundless capacity to command its resources. After the king retired, the untouched delicacies became perquisites, carefully distributed down the intricate hierarchy of servants, a tangible trickle-down of the royal bounty, or sold discreetly outside the palace gates. The sounds here are fascinatingly layered. Above the respectful murmur, listen for the specific acoustics of power. The crisp snick of a silver cover being lifted from a platter, the soft thud of a wine bottle, wrapped in a napkin to muffle its pour, being set back down. The king's low, measured voice if he chose to address someone, the collective sigh of the crowd if he acknowledged a favorite. Beneath the gilded surface, feel the tension, the exhaustion. The serving staff, for all their magnificent livery, stood for hours, muscles locked in perfect posture, eyes fixed on their tasks, minds focused on avoiding catastrophic error. The heat from the candles and the press of bodies could be stifling. The weight of the platters carried over vast distances was immense. The pressure, constant. As the final course, perhaps delicate comfits or crystallized flowers, was presented and declined with a regal wave, the ceremony reached its conclusion. The king would rise. A ripple would pass through the room as hundreds bowed deeply. He would depart, followed by his immediate entourage, leaving the glittering tableau behind. The silent army of servers would move in once more, clearing the evidence of the feast with the same efficient reverence with which they had served it. The scent of roasted meats and rich sauces would linger, slowly giving way once more to beeswax and stone. The mirrors would reflect an emptying grandeur. The performance was over. Until the next meal, The next lever, the next carefully orchestrated demonstration that the Sun King, like the celestial body he embodied, followed an immutable, dazzling course. The last echoes of the feast fade. The final servants retreat into the hidden arteries of the palace. The candles gutter low, casting long, dancing shadows across the empty splendor. Versailles, a dream built on stone, sweat, and silent service, settles into the deep quiet of night. From the pre-dawn chill of the valet's cabinet to the Queen's tragic retreat, through the hidden corridors that pulsed with unseen life, and into the dazzling, demanding theater of the King's table, we have traced the intricate rhythms of Versailles. It was a world of breathtaking contrasts, gilded ceilings soaring above damp, cramped attics, silken whispers in mirrored halls echoing the scrape of brooms on stone floors in passages below, lavish feasts conjured from steaming subterranean kitchens, absolute power sustained by absolute anonymity. Versailles demanded everything. It demanded perfection in the public gaze and invisibility in the shadows. It demanded rigid adherence to codes that governed every gesture, every word, every breath. It offered splendor beyond imagining, yet exacted a price measured in exhaustion, anxiety, and the quiet erosion of self, for both the highest and the lowest. Tonight we've brushed against the textures of that vanished world, felt the cool stone underfoot in a hidden passage, smelled the tallow smoke and damp wool of a servant's coat, heard the hushed reverence of the grand couvert, witnessed the heartbreaking dignity of a queen's final walk. Yet, as these echoes fade, let them bring not restlessness, but a profound sense of calm. For you lie in a world unimaginable to those who walked Versailles' halls, the quiet comfort of your own space, the warmth, the safety, the simple freedom from relentless ceremony and unseen eyes. These are luxuries beyond the dreams of kings and valets alike. So, let the images soften, let the scents disperse, let the sounds recede into a gentle hum, like the distant memory of fountain water. Feel the weight of history, not as a burden, but as a soft blanket, settling over you. The struggles, the grandeur, the quiet endurance, all are part of a story now complete. Allow the stillness of the empty palace, the deep silence after the final servant's step has faded, to become your own stillness. Breathe slowly, deeply. The candles are extinguished, one by one. The gold turns to shadow. The only sound now is your own breath, steady, calm, and the gentle, endless rhythm of time itself, carrying you deeper into rest.